To the Total Game Basketball Academy podcast, hosted by Tony J. Coleman, sports and education consultant. Our focus is to educate and support families of student athletes as they navigate through the recruiting process, the NIL, and life after sports. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Tony Coleman TGBA. And now, here's Tony.
Well, good morning. And welcome to another episode of the TGBA, the Total Game Basketball Academy, aka Total Game Sports Media. And this morning, I have a dynamic guest on today. My brother from a different mother, a brother who has given a lot to his community and also the industry of sports and education. And we're going to chop it up today. We're going to talk about some things as it relates to college sports, individual players, things that's happening in the industry. And, hopefully, through our discussion and conversation that all you viewers will be able to just, pull something from it, glean from it, from the experience and personal experience that will be brought forth by my man, Julani Ghana, my brother, Julani Ghana. And I'll give him an opportunity at this point to, just tell us a little bit about himself and his background. And then we're going to go ahead and jump into some topics and have some discussions. Brother?
Great. Well, first of all, great to be a part of the TGBA Sports Podcast. Been admiring the work that you've been doing for a lot of years with student athletes, families, and all those that support our young people. A little bit about myself, I'm a descendant of Holocaust survivors. I'm one of those millions of Africans born here in the United States. Very humble beginnings. Originally landed in the 1800s in South Carolina. And for some reason, unbeknownst to me, somewhere in the mid to late 1800s, on my mother's side, somebody decided to move up north here to the Philadelphia area. And so we have over 110 years right outside of Philadelphia in Delaware County called Media, Pennsylvania. I'm one of 4 children. My mother and father are still with us by God's grace. And we had some very regular fundamentals, Tony: faith, family, education, community. That was kind of how we rolled. You can imagine back in the 50s, certainly when I was born in the 60s, there weren't a lot of opportunities for people of African descent. But we believed in family and faith, school. My mother was like a Cheryl Miller, if you will, a Caitlin Clark. She was like an Angel Reese in her day. She's followed a long line of her cousins in media. That was an outstanding athlete. She's actually in the Hall of Fame down here. There's actually a book called Black Gold by John Lemon. He actually wrote this book about this community of African descendants in Media, Pennsylvania. Media is now the keystone of Delaware County, and their prowess in the region. And a plethora of my family members are in that book. And so sports very early on, Tony, became a big part of my life. Community football in Media. By the time I get to Penncrest High School, I played football and have a lot of success. Actually thought that was going to be my sport. I had a lot of success. But wind up, as you know, going to play basketball for Hall of Fame coach Herb McGee, where we met, 40 years ago, and won a lot of games, became a captain, all conference player, had a lot of awards. And like yourself, tried to pursue some professional avenues and had to go out there and get a job. Thank God I got my degree. And I fell in love with the idea, which is what I love about TGBA Sports. I could help people within the game of sports in general, basketball in particular, being a point guard, which is what I love to do. I like to help. I like to serve. I got a lot of joy out of, throwing that pass to you and watching you smash that dunk, over people and run the break. I love that. And so that became a big part of where I was going. One of my role models was a guy many people probably heard of named Harry Edwards, who was the famous sports psychologist that could understand the opportunities and avenues but challenges of blacks through sports, along with John Chaney, Vivian Stringer, John Thompson. And I know we'll talk about some of the stuff engaged in sports. And that became my life. Ultimately, after graduate school, was a basketball coach at Westchester University in the Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference, where we won, a lot of games, conference championships. I coached and recruited, 4 All-Americans. And then I left higher ed to go into the NBA, even though I got cut 15 years earlier. In 2001, I ended up as an executive with the 76ers. I think I was the first black director of community relations for our hometown team, the Sixers. Began to do a lot of work with the players, getting them into the community, raising money and awareness. And you know how everything is, man. It's not always about what you know, but who you know. And by developing relationships with a lot of the players, Allen Iverson, Dikembe Mutombo, George Lynch, Eric Snow, I eventually parlayed that into a sports management and consulting business where I became the CEO and founder of Pro Sports Community Consultants. As a matter of fact, Eric Snow was my very first client. Created him to Cleveland, and I headed out to Cleveland very early on in the 2000s. They had just drafted some young guy that you might have heard of, your audience might have heard of, named LeBron James. And so I was out there, and they had a lot of talent. Ironically, right in their area, they also had a young man that was from your hometown, DeJuan Wagner, who was in Cleveland. They had a lot of talent, but they didn't know how to win. And the one thing about Eric Snow, with his success with Philadelphia, having come from the NBA Finals a few years earlier, great leader, and he knew how to win. And so Eric became one of the co-captains. And, I started my journey, helping him with his image and his brand, helping him further his career. And then that led me to a variety of other players that I wound up representing, not just in the NBA, but also later in the NFL, tennis players. And so I did that for about a decade. Loved what I did, raised a lot of money, helped a lot of athletes not just get into the league. It's one thing to get into the league, but it's another thing to stay in the league. How do you stay in the league? How do you collect that beautiful fat check with all those zeros for as many years as possible when every single year somebody's trying to take your job? It takes a lot more than that. So I did that for a while, Tony. But, everything has its season, as they say. And after a decade, by the time we get into around 2012, 13, 14, my season had gone. My guys were older, were retiring. And here comes the LeBron James, guys I had a chance to talk with. I like to think had a good impact on about how to be in this business. And the whole really world changed with LeBron. Everybody kind of followed his lead. And others that being sharp, being dynamic, keeping your nose clean, dot your I's, cross your T's, look sharp, but also be a business entrepreneur. And I think we can see now in the 21st century, that is the norm here. So that's my background, Tony. I eventually ended up, kind of retiring from that area, going back to my other love, which was youth and education. Became a director back in Chester, PA, one of my hometown areas as well, with the College Access Center of Delaware County, where I could really impact students who are preparing for college, like you talk about, and like you do at TGBA, getting them ready for school, some kind of education beyond high school. If they want to get involved with sports, how do I help their family? And now I am at Cheyney University of Pennsylvania, the nation's first institution of higher learning for people of African descent in the United States. We share that distinction with our neighbor, Lincoln University, who happens to be the first institution to actually provide what we would today call college degrees. They have a healthy rivalry between Lincoln and Cheyney. I like to say we got the same grandmother, just different daddies, but we all go to the same cookout. No need to get into no scuffle over it. But I'm at Cheyney. I've served there mentoring and supporting young people. And, I got a couple more laps to run in this race, big fella. And I'm hoping that I can continue to support students at HBCUs, but it doesn't really matter to you. And I know it doesn't really matter to me where they go, as long as they pursue some education, get some kind of training in this competitive world beyond high school. So it's a pleasure to be here, on Saturday morning, March 1st, 2025. And I'm so proud of you and happy to be a part of TGBA Sports.
Wow. That's absolutely awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that, man. The background. And of course, I knew it, but to make sure that our audience know and understand exactly what, we have here on the show today. Uh, a plethora of experiences, a plethora of, knowledge and understanding and caring and working with, different aspects of the sports industry, man. So that's some great stuff right there. So with all that being said, we got and this is for the audience as well. I do have some nicknames that I refer to my good brother by, and I call him L.A., aka Little Anthony, and that goes back to our hardwood balling days on the court. And many of you may not even know, but they used to call me Mark Aguirre. And we're not gonna get into that right now. We're not gonna get into what that is, but
Big Mark, can you rise?
It was Big Mark and Little Anthony, man. We was doing that thing, man, out there on that court, having a lot of fun doing it as well. And so let's step into some of this hoop stuff here, my man.
Let's do it.
So, first off, I want to give you a scenario, and I'm gonna give you some names, and I want you to tell me out of these three names, who would you start, who would you bench, and who would you cut?
Uh-oh.
The names is Isaiah Thomas, the bad boy Detroit Isaiah Thomas, Jason Kidd, and Chris Paul, CP3.
Wow. Well, I know I'm starting Isaiah Thomas. I know that from the beginning. But I'll probably put him in the order. I would put Isaiah Thomas is definitely going to start. Jason Kidd is going to be my off the bench guy, big guard, super fast. And then the young wizard of the 21st century, Chris Paul. If I had to cut any of them, I unfortunately have to cut CP3, as they call him.
Yeah. It's tough, right? Isn't it hard? Isn't it hard, man?
Because these are point guards, not lead guards, not shoot first guards. These are point guards, floor generals, people that don't have to be the leading scorer on the court, but they absolutely dominate the game. So all three of them would be worthy of being on the squad for sure.
Right, absolutely. All right, here's some more names for you. Start, bench, or cut. Dylan Harper, R.J. Davis, Mark Sears.
And them Rutgers boys, they're tremendous. They are tremendous. Wow. Well, Mark Sears, who I like, is a college player, but I know I'm cutting him if it's down to those three. I go with Dylan Harper. I think Dylan has the most upside. But the one thing I like about RJ Davis is he's a seasoned, gritty, competitor out there. And I like his game. But, Harper, I think he's a special player. I think he's got a potential to be a really, really, really top of the line player. But, I could see RJ kind of being like Eric. He's tough, he's strong. He's one of those guys that if you get with the right team, he could be a 10-year veteran in the league.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Moving right along. I got another set of names for you. Start, bench, or cut. Carl Anthony Towns, Evan Mobley, and Jabari Smith Jr.
How about that? here's the irony. I actually worked with Jabari Smith's father, Jabari Smith Sr.,
Yeah.
for about a year and a half. We did a lot of stuff together. If you remember, he was a member of the 76ers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually I had a chance to spend some time with him in Vegas, you know, after the draft, after Jabari came out, you know, coming into his rookie year, and I got a chance to chop it up with him up there. Yeah,
Okay.
really nice guy, really
Yeah,
nice
very
guy.
nice. He actually helped me a great deal
Hmm.
because you're trying to get your feet wet and you're trying to build relationships with these players because a big part of my job was getting them to do the thing from the community perspective
Hmm.
that the team wanted them to engage in. Jabari was very helpful,
Hmm.
really nice guy, and he was really unique too because he was so tall and long, but he was a face to basket player. He had crazy, what we would call, the young people call crazy handles at
Hmm.
6'10", and so
Hmm.
it didn't even occur to me until later. Wait a minute, I know that name. When his son eventually got drafted,
Right.
and whatever, we'll see what Jabari Jr., if you will, or the younger Jabari's upside will be. He's playing with Houston, and and everybody on that team is young. If you're a young player, the one thing you don't want is everybody in your team to be young. You want to be the one young guy with the energy, play with the old heads because they're gonna get tired. With the
Yeah.
young heads, everybody's trying to prove themselves, and so I think Jabari has to get out of there. But I'm going to start Evan Mobley on
Hmm.
out of this group, and I think we could see from last night's game against the Celtics why. Um, he First of all, he just commands. And Tony, you know this. Even though you played out of position, as a small forward, power forward, sometimes center at 6'5", because you could really run and handle the ball. You could have easily have been a face to basket and probably would have been a face to basket player as a guard, one or two, even three. Um, you got to have, and your team needs you to have a presence in that paint area. What we call elbow, extended, and below. And while Carl Anthony Towns, a tremendous talent, has a lot of game, very skilled player,
Hmm.
he does not really command that kind of attention foul line in. Doesn't mean he can't score there. When I talk about command attention, like, yo, this guy is a problem, offensively, defensively. And Boston, found that out last night, with Evan Mobley, who hit a couple threes, because, in this game you do that.
Yeah.
But his presence around the rim, and I think you probably, if you glanced at the game last night,
Hmm.
his rebounding and ability to put the ball back in the basket, in and around the basket area, after a Mitchell miss or a Darius Garland miss, critical. So Evan Mobley gets my vote to start. Thank God I don't have to turn away Towns because he does have a lot of talent, a
Yeah.
very skilled player. But I think the Knicks are kind of like, man, we're
Mhm.
happy to have a Robinson back
Right.
because we can talk about all this positionless basketball and
Uh-huh.
what are they, all these stuff, space
Mhm.
and pace and all that. You
Mhm.
better have some big people around that basket who can change shots, block some shots, and get some rebounds, as well as from time to time face the
Mhm.
basket. And I think Mobley, out of those three, does the best job of that.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Good breakdown. So now tell me, Jelana Ghana, what's your top five college teams? And March is here now. Today is March 1st, so the madness is about to kick in. So it's like either do or die at this point. The selection committee is busy. So who would be your top five currently right now in college basketball?
You know, big fella, when I think about college basketball, I have to. I always try to think, okay, well, who can win it all? You know what I mean? And so, of course, that involves talent, but there's some other intangible things that me and you talk about all the time in terms of coaching, preparation, and those kind of things. And I've been, racking my brain trying to weigh all of these factors without, of course, overthinking it.
Mhm.
Um, and I say that because there's um, them damn Spartans of Michigan State that are kind of hovering in the top 10, maybe the second part of the top 10. But I know when that tournament starts and the way coach prepares them, that I would not be surprised if they make a Final Four or a Final Eight over teams that have been ranked higher or might even have more absolute raw talent. So I'm trying not. I keep changing my mind, on this thing. So I've struggled a little bit, but let me tell you who's impressed me so far. And I'll go 5 all the way to number 1. Number 5 has been Tennessee. And Tennessee is an experienced team because they had a nice run last year, in the tournament. Didn't quite get as far as they want. I think that's the team. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's the team that Dalton Connect found his way on and really made a big splash before the Lakers gobbled him up. And he's had a nice year with the Lakers. But they've got some guys back, and they've got a backcourt, some experienced guys. So I like that team and would not be surprised. My 4th team is the team that I just know has the talent, but I just know they're going to self-destruct and it's a curse. It's the Houston Cougar curse. You know what I'm saying? And me and during our days of Phi Slamma Jamma, and Mr. Meeshaw, Larry, Mr. Meeshaw, and Clyde the Glide, and of course Dream, Franklin and all those guys. Houston, man, every year they've got just, oh my gosh, I love watching their physical talent. But as you know, when you get into the tournament, the game kind of changes, and I'm just not sure if they have what it takes in the technical game to make it all the way through. Now, Florida is the team that intrigues me the most. I would not be surprised if Florida gets to a final because they have a well-balanced team. They're well-coached. They got size, and they are really athletic. They are really athletic. So, to me, they're really due for a breakthrough in terms of making a run to at least get to the final game, because I think since Joakim Noah and all of them, I think Al Horford was on that team that went back to back. I think Billy Donovan might have been the head coach back in the early 2000s, but I don't think they've really made any noise since now. Last year I could see them, so I'm surprised. The last 2 teams are the teams that could go either way. Duke and Auburn. And I'm going back and forth with those 2, and I know they're on everybody's rankings. Duke is just Duke. You know what I mean? The atmosphere, the kind of players that they generally recruit, and the atmosphere. What you don't always see with Duke is you don't always see them break down in that 2 to 3 minute time frame when the game is on the line. And that's really what you need when you have so much talent out there, Tony, is the last 3 minutes. And it's funny because when we were talking about Isaiah, Jason Kidd, and Chris Paul and who would you keep and why it's so difficult, because I need a guy like that in the last 3 minutes. And that was one of my specialties, to close the game, to know who should get the ball. And I've watched Duke, and they've got a number of players that I think with the coaching can close the game, even though they're young. Cooper Flagg, who everybody's talking about. I think he's a nice player, but he does have a poise about him that I think that can help them down the stretch. Now they got the big fella, in the middle, and I think that might be a detriment to them in the finals, depending on who they play, because he's so raw, and he does have a tendency to get into foul trouble. They're going to need him a lot more. He's the kind of young man that I think will probably be one and done. But, man, if he stays, and if Cooper even stays for another year, I think they're going to enter the pros much more polished. But that's a team. And then Auburn. Auburn, they're sensational. And their coach is seasoned now, and I've been watching him. I think he coaches better than he has in years past. He's always had talent, but
Mhm.
I think they're ready for the technical game. But
Mhm.
again, those are teams that a Tom Izzo can get. A Tom Izzo can get those teams, in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Hell, even
Yeah.
a team like what's Patino got? St. John's, which is kind of
St.
a
John.
sleeper.
Mhm.
They coach that technical game that could get those overly athletic games. The
Mhm.
last team is the sleeper. We always think about this team for football, but that Alabama team is nice, man, and they made a nice run last year, the last couple of years as well.
Right.
But yeah, I'll stick with those groups: Tennessee, Houston, Florida, Duke, and Auburn. But look out for some of the others that I mentioned, Tony. It's going to be a
Okay.
hell of a run down the stretch.
Okay. So there you have it, folks. Straight from the mouth of L.A. His top 5 college ball teams. So we'll be looking at these games, man, and these teams as this March Madness unfolds. So along these same lines, you look at the selection committee, and they got to look at all the conferences, and there's a plethora of those conferences, and as over the last several years, there's been a lot of moving and shaking and shifting of teams and programs going to new and different conferences. Um, some of the conferences that used to be dominant are no longer the dominant conferences. But I have a few conferences I'm going to throw at you that I want you to tell me your opinion. Uh, who is the strongest conference based on what you think? Okay, so let's begin with the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the ACC. Out of those 4 conferences, which conference would you uh, surmise and say is the strongest?
You know what's interesting, Tony, is the shift that's happened in collegiate sports over the last 25 years. Um, my father's from Virginia. He's a Southern man, so he raised us in the Southern tradition. How we engaged women, a certain degree of decorum and respect, um, was something that we were drilled with, and we would always talk about the South. Of course, the South has uh, an interesting history in the United States, particularly as it relates to the exploitation of talent, African or Black talent in the United States. And so the North and the Northeast had all the mouth. Of course, all the power was in the Northeast corridor, beginning with Washington, D.C., Maryland, Delaware, Philadelphia, New York. That's where all the money, the Industrial Revolution. And the South was the agricultural place, and
Right.
the cotton picking and all that kind of stuff. And of course, we were right in the middle of that, being in the South, so Florida, Mississippi, and Alabama, and Georgia, and Arkansas, and all those were right down there. And when we were coming through, Tony, the Northeast dominated basketball, and the South dominated football, you know.
Right.
Um, And so those small private schools that me and you know all so well, the Georgetowns, the St. John's, the Villanovas, of course, being here in the Philly area, at that time, for me and you growing up in the 60s and 70s, you didn't have to really leave the Philly area. We all thought, man, I could go to St. Joe's, big time LaSalle, big time Villanova, big time Temple. We had some really great schools, not to mention the Northeast small private kind of Catholic schools.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore. The South has come back to reclaim, and it ain't just football. It is now basketball. So to me, the top conference,
Mm-hmm.
especially now with the mergers that you've mentioned, they've pilfered a lot of other conferences, and have really rated like the we call it the Big 12 when we were kind of coming through with Oklahoma and Texas and all that. Well, they're now in the SEC. You know what I'm saying? So to me, the Southeastern Conference, if you will, is the big dog. Surprisingly, number two is still the Big 12, if they still call it that, even though Texas and Oklahoma have defected. And I don't like that, by the way. They should have stayed where they were at. I think that makes for good competition for football and basketball. But that I guess they still call it the Big 12. They play great basketball. Great, very exciting. Oh my God, stud athletes everywhere. Ironically, the West Coast, which was the Pac-10 when we were going to Pac-12, which had UCLA and USC, they've kind of mucked around with that, really messed that up because we always thought about the Arizona State, UCLA, California, USC, that West, but now you got some of them in the Big Ten now and mucking around with that. So I'm not so happy about it, but that to me has hurt the overall ability of the West Coast. And now what do we got? USC, now part of the Big Ten, I think now. So the Big Ten basketball, I think, is going to be competitive in the tournament. That's why I mentioned Michigan State. Michigan is surprisingly back. They have a nice team. And Wisconsin, of course, is always that team that you better not catch them on the wrong day or you're going to catch the L. So those Midwest teams are dominant. The East, Tony, is we call it the Big East. I'm not sure if they're still calling it the Big East. UConn has really been the team that has been holding that down along with Villanova, and that's that technical game. Great coaching. They still get a lot of good athletes, but really good coaching. And as you know, Hurley, who you know for a long time, Danny, coming from that family from the East Coast, has done phenomenal job at UConn, and they just churning out great players. And Jay Wright, before he left Villanova, I think they won 2 out of 3 or 2 out of 4 years. And I see that the young fella that he left there has finally got Villanova moving again. Is Shaka Smart still at Marquette?
He's still at Marquette. Yep.
So that's a team, and Creighton, so that those have hung in there. So, but that SEC, we would love, me and you being football players. We always thought about Death Valley with LSU and Georgia and Alabama, and we thought about them for football. But good God Almighty, what they're doing now, they have parlayed the gazillions, and trust me, it is gazillions. They have parlayed the gazillions from football revenues into all of their athletic programs, basketball being men's and women's, because we see what Dawn Staley's doing with the women. They have parlayed that into their men's and women's sports programs. SEC is a monster, Tony. SEC is a monster.
I cannot agree with you more. Can't agree with you more. SEC is it with that Big 12, man. Like right behind, coming right up, right behind, in my opinion. Yeah. So, man, I like that response there, LA. I like that response. We're going to shake it up a little bit, and we're going to look at some of these other leagues that's popping up, on the surface for various reasons. We know that, the basketball game, both men and women, have their pros and their cons. So the game is being spearheaded on the men's side more so than anything, right? So what happens to those guys who play in the NBA or play overseas or, that no longer can play in the NBA? They have either gotten too old or they just, got their jobs taken and no longer in the league, but they still can play. They still can, be a fan favorite. So what did Ice Cube do? He said, look, man, I'm going to grab a lot of these guys, and I'm going to start a 3-on-3 basketball league. and spread this thing out and try to build something here. So over the last 7 years, he's done a phenomenal job. And now what's happening is the 3-on-3 men's side is starting to spread and be sold to different cities around the country. Guess what? Brittany Griner on the other side for women, she goes over and have that episode in Russia where she's held. We try to get her out. She finally come home, and so why are these women that play in the WNBA are going overseas to play in the off season? Why? To earn more money, right? Because the salaries that they get don't compare to the men's side. So guess what? Brianna Stewart, former standout women basketball player, decides to start a 3-on-3 league for women during the off season to help them remain here in the States. So with that being said, Ice Cube 3-on-3, Brianna Stewart's 3-on-3. When you look at the two and you compare and you look at the perspective from a lens of, okay, how are they going to fare out and how are they going to actually either remain and grow or fizzle out. So what's your opinion about those leagues for the men and the women on the 3-on-3 side?
Hey, that's an excellent topic. Earlier, I think I used a cliche. When you get old like us, you have all these kind of corny cliches, but they are relevant. So I'm going to throw a couple at you. One of the things that we tell students regarding the importance of networking is that it's not always about what you know, it's about who you know. We talk about that. But there's another cliche, and they always talk about this one, even more than who you know, is timing and positioning. Because you can know Barack Obama, okay, but he ain't the man right now. So timing and positioning are really the keys to success. In essence, being at the right place at the right time. And so for women's sports overall, the young ladies that are participating today are in the right place at the right time. The Cynthia Coopers, the Carol Millers, the Lisa Leslies, the McGee's, and these fabulous, absolutely fabulous professional women athletes. You have to look at them in the proper lens. You have to look at them like Mikan. You have to look at them like Cousy and Russell. You have to look at them like Chamberlain and Hal Greer. You have to look at them like Spencer Haywood and Connie and Julius and all of those guys that they made great money, many of them, but the bulk of them in that time, me and you were children. They all had to work another job while they played in the league. Yeah. And I try to get people who just think because there's women and there's men, they should be paid the same. It's not quite as same as that. This is a complex issue that you have to look in the proper perspective. That these NBA players back in the 50s, especially the 60s, and even going into the 70s, almost all of them had to work what we would call a regular job.
Yep.
In addition to going all around the place, and there was competition eventually with the ABA, that emerged as another alternative, and they tried to lure. I think I posted something, Tony, I think you may have looked at the other day with, I think it was Connie Hawkins talking about, him coming out and what all of that meant early and the money that was denied him and then later offered him. Wilt went to Kansas. Couldn't go into the NBA right away. LeBron might not catch him record-wise if he was able to come out of high school. You know what I mean? Remember, Wilt had to go to Kansas. Then he had to spend a whole year with the Globetrotters. You know what I mean? So there was all of these things that were happening that impacted what we now call the NBA. So those pioneers who were really, really, really good players. And in the more modern times, Tony, I would say that when people look at what Michael Jordan, as big as Michael Jordan was, and as big as he still is, if they look at his best salary compared to what guys who aren't even starters are making right now,
Right.
they wouldn't even believe it because everything has grown and there are new opportunities that are around. And so timing and positioning, I mentioned to you about Eric. When Eric came out of Michigan State, he was a first team all Big Ten player of the year, but he wasn't thinking about going to no pros, not with them guys. But timing and positioning, guess what happened? The NBA was expanding with 2 or 3, 4 teams. So they needed more players. He was fortunate to get on with Seattle before he found a home with the Sixers and eventually with Cleveland. So timing and positioning is important. I say that because when we look at the women's game today, the timing allows women to now begin to take advantage of opportunity. See, back when we were kids, baseball was America's game, and football was just emerging as a superpower. And today, football is unquestionably the definite article superpower when it comes to sports. So now women, because of the last, say, 10 to 15 years, not even in women's basketball, it was really women in soccer and as gymnastics were coming up that really started to rattle that cage for opportunities for women. Of course, the passing of Title IX and the enforcement of Title IX. These are all things that Cheryl Miller and them guys didn't have any of those. You know, the AIWA and Myers and all those great female players, even Cheryl Swoops, they didn't have the benefits. So what you mentioned earlier, where the women's game was being evaluated based on the men's game. And the men's game was just off the chart, especially via Georgetown, that the Fab Five, the Phi Slamma Jamma, or that college game already had 10 to 12,000 students already in a location. They were all coming to the game, the Dukies and all that. And as good as David Thompson and Lou Alcindor were and the Phi Slamma Jamma, the NBA coming into the 80s was still that much better. The women's game wasn't. The women's college game was still superior to the women's program. Number one, as I mentioned, they had 12,000 students already on campus. So they had those small college arenas and those women hooping in college, UConn being the standard right outside of Tennessee, they were killing it. Then you go to the pros, and they're like, "Who was Cynthia Cooper? Like, who was that?" Like, because they didn't have the name recognition, because corporate America, and if we want to say they were biased towards men, I'm not going to disagree. They had not tuned into the women's game, even though there was as great as Maya Moore was. They still weren't, Candace Parker was just coming on the end of that. But remember, Shamik Holdsclaw and some of those women, man, they were just getting passed over because people were comparing them to the men who had already had a century head start. Right. But good God Almighty, things started to change. And now what you have is a major breakthrough. It's very similar with Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese. It's very similar to what happened with Magic and Larry coming out of Indiana State and Michigan State. It was ripe for what we would call in industry a disruption. It was ripe for a disruption. And of course, because we're talking about the United States, you can't talk about anything in the United States without talking about race. Black and white having a big piece of that, because that's not unique to America, but it is definitely foundational to every aspect of America. So you had this tremendous young white, in this case, female player, and this tremendous young black player, because up to that point, even though you had, Breanna Stewart, you had Diana Taurasi, you had the little point guard Sabrina UNESCO, you had some great white players, but the black players, even in the women's game, still dominated. But when Caitlin came, she was like Larry. She was unbelievable. She was schooling everybody, black, white, anybody in between. She was putting it in. I go all around the question because the breakthrough happened for the women's game. And now, as we're watching women, and because you didn't coach state champions women, high school All Americans, you sent a lot of young ladies to college. When you're looking at the women's game now, you're just like, what just happened? Like in front of our eyes, the women's game has metamorphosized. And so now what that means is that opportunities for women to play basketball, ingratiate corporate sponsorship, meaning like, whoa, we can now do more than just make pink shirts, pink Eagle shirts, pink Miami Dolphins shirts, pink New York Jets shirts, and get the women. We can get the women because they are out there playing. Mm-hmm. And so while Ice Cube has done a tremendous job, if you notice, Ice Cube, his league is for OGs like me and you, guys that we grew up watching, some of which faded into the woodwork. We didn't know who they are. Mm-hmm. I think Unrivaled is interesting because it still has the current players playing. Now that Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf and Joe Johnson and some OG basketball players who we always wondered where they're at, they're kind of fading out. A lot of the Ice Cube 3-on-3 league are guys that many of us never heard of. They were really good players, former All-Americans at Florida Atlantic, but we didn't know who they were. Wyoming, we didn't know who they were. Right. Unrivaled, you've got Brianna playing, you got Alyssa playing, you got, Sabrina playing. So I think that has a lot of potential. But even more than that, and I'm going to get off my high horse, I just think what we're seeing in the men's game with the possibility of an international professional league. We know we have the NBA in Africa and an African professional league. We've got a variety of European professional leagues. I'm looking at a lot more opportunities. China has their league that Stephon Marbury and many other guys played in, and they made tremendous money. I see these things happening for women domestically. I think that Toyota, Holiday Inn, Marriott, I think they see an opportunity to get behind women's sports because women have always been the lead in the consumer area. They're the people that make the decisions when it comes to buying. Mm-hmm. But I think now that the corporate America is opening up to women, so I see nothing but great opportunities for women. And I see the rules changing. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I see the rules changing for women in terms of their being able to access professional sports opportunities so that they don't necessarily have to leave the country unless the deal is good. Like they just left the country because, to go make $50,000 in Russia, or England or something like that. But I think I was watching Nafisa Collier, and she played in that tournament that they had about a week ago. And I think the prize was $200,000. Just to go show you how the TV and the game has changed because, cats like us, there really wasn't that many options for women to watch. But, they had the women's thing and Nafisa, she, I think it was a one-on-one, she lined up beating the athlete, I think it was Howard, in the final, and she won $200,000. She shared the bulk of that with her teammates. And then I think she said just in that tournament, she made more money in the tournament than she had in her WNBA season. And that's telling. It's not negative towards men. I'm saying that's a breakthrough. I'm sure it's the same kind of breakthrough that a lot of the NBA guys in the 60s and 70s were saying, like, man, I don't have to now work another job because the sport was growing. So,
Right.
in closing, I think what Dawn Staley has done after, I forget the great coach from Tennessee, God rest his soul, who passed away,
That's something.
Pat Summitt, the coach Yao from North Carolina State, and of course the great Gino Auriemma, who's from our Philly area. They have been carrying the mantle for women's basketball along with a lot of other fantastic coaches. Dawn Staley is the right coach, along with the great coach at LSU. They're the right coaches at the right time. And they have prepared and elevated college basketball. Because let's not pretend the college basketball coaches play a big role in the promotion of the game, too. John Thompson, John Chaney, of course, the great Bobby Knight. John Wooden was the greatest coach, but he couldn't really push it the way these guys, Calipari being very controversial, Pitino being very controversial. So people were tuning into men's college basketball because they want to see if Bobby Knight, if he's going to get thrown out today, if John Chaney was going to cut somebody out today. You know what I mean? Those were the big things in addition to the game. Well, now we're seeing the same thing where Gino and Pat now got, Dawn. People want to see Dawn today. And the little point guard that's now the LSU coach, who was a super player. I forget her name, that wears all the outfits.
Oh, Mulkey.
Mulkey, who was a tremendous player and is a tremendous coach, but now she's a personality. And I think all of these, Tony, lead to great opportunities for women's basketball on the same level, or I would say on an increasingly positive level for women. And I think that women's time is coming. I think it's a tsunami. I think it's coming. And I think as long as we continue to embrace, support, and promote women's sports, there's going to be a day where the kind of salaries that we see connected to Stephen Curry and Durant, and it's not necessarily fair to compare them because these are world icons, but the women all over the world are going to start playing basketball, just like men all over the world, because of America, the Dream Team and whatever else are playing basketball, which opens up markets. The same thing's going to happen for women. And I see nothing but big things for women's basketball.
So what you're saying is, from looking at the new 3-on-3 leagues, that for women is actually it was very beneficial. It's not that they are competing against each other, but it's been beneficial for them. So if Ice Cube doesn't start a 3-on-3 pro league, will Breanna Stewart and a few of our other investors decide to start a 3-on-3 league for women?
Yeah.
So, from that perspective, I think that it is something that kind of helped them.
No question. And people forget that the NBA subsidizes and has subsidized the WNBA for almost all of her existence. So there's been a commitment. We've got guys, I think it was Kyrie Irving, who I think during COVID-19 donated a significant part of his salary, and of course we know it's humongous, to make sure that women who weren't unable to make a living because of COVID. So, we don't have to, beat it down in terms of men squashing women. It takes a while, and we see it from parts of, African Americans in sport. During my time in the NBA, I had a chance to befriend and be considered a nephew to the first African American to ever play in an NBA game. His name was Earl Lloyd. I call him Uncle Earl. And I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with him. What it was like.
Legend.
What it was like to play at that time. And he had to work. And right here in Philly, we got the great Sonny Hill. And Sonny Hill was talking about, before the ABA was the Eastern Basketball League, Sonny Hill was a superstar player in the Eastern. They paid more than the NBA, You know what I'm saying? And he would talk about how he had to get a job. And of course, Sonny was a leader in one of the largest unions in Philadelphia because, you couldn't really make money like that
Right.
in the Eastern basketball. I had a chance. Paul Arizin, God rest his soul, was a top 50 all time player in the NBA, right here from the Springfield area. Chris, you probably know, played at Drexel. He's right around your age.
Mm.
And Mr. Arizin used to tell me how things were when he played in the NBA in the 60s. And them guys all had to work, and
Mm-hmm.
they weren't really making no money compared
Right.
to what these guys are making now.
Right.
These guys are carrying around, Tony, in their pocket for spending money
Yeah.
what these guys were making in the NBA. So the time is right. And like you said, if Ice Cube, the
Mm-hmm.
thing I'm trying to get across is opportunity
Has
for
been.
genius. Because like you said, Ice Cube saw something. The Rock is trying to do it in football. The NFL saw it happen with the AFL for a while, the NBA, the ABA, the XFL, the AFL, arena football.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to try to enter these spaces. And
Mm-hmm.
now women are saying it's our turn to what? Enter these spaces
Right.
and come up with or throw things against the wall, because that's what the ABA was. They were
Mm-hmm.
throwing things against the wall. Let's see what'll stick.
Right. Right.
Eventually, as you know, the NBA took Connie and Spencer, Julius, David Thompson, adopted teams like the Nuggets and the Spurs into the NBA, the same as the AFL. When the AFL, those teams wind up going, Kansas City and them wind up coming into the NBA. So for lady entrepreneurs or for entrepreneurs in general who see an opportunity in women's sports, I think it's the Wild West, wide
Mm.
open.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, yeah, man. So thanks, man, for that response. That was a plethora of historical uh, knowledge and a great perspective of comparative notes from the past, present, and as we look into the future from men and both women, as it relates to the basketball, the game of basketball on a wide scale. So, yeah, I'm excited, man, because it's so much, man, to ponder and think about as we reflect on where things started and how things are now. And one of the biggest things that I try to always do with the young fellas and the women is tell them to know your history of this game that you love, because you're standing on some shoulders, man, of people who didn't have everything that you have currently in terms of
Mhm.
opportunity, in terms of finances, and just how to just really get yourself set. So you got to pay your homage and pay your dues and respects to those folks. And
Shay.
yeah, yeah. So shifting to another perspective. We're talking about college sports. So I know each and every year, man. I tend to watch all the different conferences, and I see young kids coming in, and many kids that I get a chance to watch during their high school career, and they go to college and they play in all these different great programs, big programs, mid-major programs, and even some of the D2s and D3s. Um, but they are phenomenal players. So my question to you is currently, as it relates to college basketball players, who has really stood out and captured your attention or your interest in this year as you watched and followed college basketball?
Well, being a little man, um, I always say you're only as good as your guards. You got to have good guards, and
Mm.
it's really competitive. Just more and more the talent that's out there, um, and ironically, right in our area, because we're here in the Philadelphia, Jersey area, Delaware area, within driving distance is a town called New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Mm.
And they got two dudes on that team that I think are what I would call guys to watch. I know there's a lot of tension on Cooper Flagg, who came into the college year like Zion Williamson and other great players did with a lot of fanfare, and he has absolutely delivered, no question. But I'm telling you, Bailey and Harper from Rutgers,
Mm.
they got game, man.
Mm.
If I'm a backup guard in the NBA,
Mm.
I'm like, man, I got some competition for that 12 spot. Remember, in the NBA, that 12 spot is a damn good spot. That's a nice check. It still got a lot of zeros, but that's a vulnerable spot. That's one of those 1-and-1 deals where you got this year guaranteed. The next year is a team option. So you walking around in street clothes sometimes, or you dress, but you ain't really getting in the game. And you killing the warm ups, and of course you really play before the game and after the game. So those last, say, 3 or 4 spots on every NBA team are always up for grabs. That's why it's so competitive. And so young guys, especially on veteran teams, those guys have opportunities. And I'm telling you that Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey from Rutgers, both of those guys are terrific players. And I really think that those are guys that have really caught my eye. The other guy that caught my eye, McGuire, matter of fact, I think I watched him 2 nights ago. Boy, did he show his tail off. Good God almighty. And that's a young fella from Texas named Trey Johnson. This Mammy Jammy, oh, man. He's got game. If he gets, I can't wait to see, because I've been kind of looking at things a little bit differently now. I have no interest in going back into professional sports, but I like to play GM and see who's going to get where, and everything, again, is about right place at the right time. And this kid, Trey Johnson, he's a talent, and he's got a poise to his game that I think can resonate in the NBA. He's strong. He's very young, so he's going to grow into his body. And he reminded me of the young man that's with San Antonio now, who is a tremendous rookie. I see him as he got a chance to be a superstar, and that's the kid Castle from San Antonio to play the UConn. I watched this guy, and what's he, like your size, 6'5", like you. I don't know how he does it, Aguirre, but he jumps to the moon fast. Like before you know it, his head's at the rim. I'm like, so everybody's thinking they can get him on the block, but he's boom, like that quick. Yeah, he's a phenomenal, and he was a guy that I think everybody thought could be good, but they're like, it's a weak draft. So San Antonio kind of got him. They're like, whoa, boy, did we get a steal here? Right. You know, so I think Trey is a little bit better of a shooter than Castle. Stephon Castle, I think is his name. But he's that kind of what they're going, that Shea Gildress Alexander type of guard. That's kind of more of a lead guard where their scoring is ahead of their playmaking, but they can play make.
Right.
Whereas when I grew up, to our chagrin, the guys in my era, all we wanted to do was play make. And sometimes the team needed you to be more offensive minded. But we were so hell bent on being Maurice Cheek that we were content with the 12 points, 12 assists, 4 steals, and then making the key call at the end when the team said, man, I really need you to get 19 today. You're like, oh shit. I think this kid Trey Johnson from Texas is a guy to watch.
Okay. All right. You hear that, folks? Trey in Texas. Keep your eyes out.
Johnson.
Keep your eyes out. So, in conclusion, I have one more thing that I'm going to throw at you, little Anthony, as we bring this thing down to a wind down, a conclusion, a close for this particular episode. And we had some trades that took place in the NBA. Luka, to the Lakers, Anthony Davis to Dallas. We had Butler, going to Golden State out of Miami, and then we had Klay Thompson, who actually got traded during the beginning of the season, to Dallas. So with these shifts and moves of these superstar players to these particular franchises, there's a lot of controversial comments and from the fans and from the Monday morning quarterbacks and so on and so forth. So I'm going to dig in on you, as to what your perspective is on these NBA trades, man, that just took place. Did these teams fare out? Did they really benefit? Is it going well? What do you see happening in the future? There's some more talk out there, and I think it's more of a ploy than anything of Bronny James now feeling this little disgruntled because of Luka has taken away all the minutes that he was getting. So now he's like, look, either play me or trade me, So and then he put out a couple teams out there that, hey, I'll be great in Cleveland. I'll be great in Boston, and so it's funny the way things get during these particular little debates and controversial things. So, with that being said, man, what do you think about these NBA trades?
Now that was a new one. That's a good spin. Bronny James thinking that he is connected to thinking. Someone is saying he's connected to his playing time being impacted by, of all people, not little point guard Gabe, not Dalton Connect, not Vanderbilt, but Luka. I don't think so. So I don't believe any of that. But let's talk about some of these trades in the NBA. And as I mentioned, I've been blessed to have had a lot of time being an insider in the NBA, and really seeing its inner workings, being in meetings, being in practices, going to training camps and finals and all that. So I kind of have a decent idea of how this works. And I keep going back to the same thing, Aguirre, right place at the right time. And sometimes you're not in the right place at the right time. And a lot of times, if you're not careful, and sometimes it's beyond your control, you become a journeyman because you're good and you're definitely one of the top players in the world, but you're expendable. So when we start talking about these trades, I'm going to put that in the context of one of the trades, a guy that played for the Boston Celtics, who was really a main part of the Celtics, but they couldn't get over the hill, and he was expendable, and that's Marcus Smart. Remember Marcus Smart?
Yes, sir.
And Marcus Smart got sent to Memphis, where they got the young Ja Morant. They got a terrific player and the shooter, I forget his name, the Husky guy, who's a hell of a player. And he got lost in addition to getting injured. And Marcus Smart just got traded to the Washington Wizards. Purgatory. So we don't know what's going to happen to Marcus Smart, but he was one of those trades that you were talking about that happened that nobody paid attention to. And it's a shame because Marcus Smart was considered to be that next kind of two-way guard that was tough and whatever, but he wasn't really a point guard. He was kind of an athlete. You mentioned Jimmy Butler. Who knows when Jimmy's going to soil his time in Miami, Golden State, like he did in Miami and in Minnesota and in Philadelphia and in Chicago. Like, he's the kind of guy that always leaves the place under controversy.
Mm-hmm.
I like his addition to the Warriors, but if they don't continue to get better play from their quote unquote bigger people. And one thing about the Warriors, got to tell people, remind me of the Showtime Lakers when we were growing up, the Celtics. And even when the Warriors were successful, while people were focused on Stephen at the time, Clay and all that, the Warriors kept big people who rebounded the hell out of the ball and defended at high levels. They weren't the superstar. Like people thought Boston was a half-court slow-down team. Nah, Boston, they were fast break. People thought the Lakers, when we were in the 80s, they're Showtime, they're soft. Nah, they were stars out there. Imagine them guys was gritty. And so Jimmy Butler brings to Golden State something that they needed besides the explosive Draymond Green was somebody, especially in that backcourt area, that could push guys around a little bit, bump guys, besides being a good player. So I like him as a fit, but I think Golden State still has to find a way to get Moody playing better. The big guy who's a rebounder who won a couple championships from UCLA, I forget what his name is, reminds me of Shango. But he's a big guy. They got a young fella in there. They've got to get rebounders because they're going to miss a lot of shots.
Right.
Jimmy's allowing them, because he's such a great rebounder for his size, to get extra shots, and that's helped them. Here's a sleeper that people aren't talking about, but I thought was really good, was Milwaukee finally being able to unload Middleton. That was big, and brought in Kyle Kuzma. Young. He's still got a lot of energy. He can shoot the ball. He's still at that 6'7", 6'8" range, can defend. He was, to me, a really good pickup for them. And I don't know if they can overcome Boston, because Boston has such incredible depth. And their coach uses them really, really well. But Giannis and Dollar Dame, they needed another person. And Middleton was that third person for them. Middleton was getting buckets before his leads fell out. So watching how Kyle fits in with them, the great work that they're doing with Gary Trent Jr., they've got a couple other guys in there. Milwaukee's going to be interesting because they got that boy Giannis. And he is fantastic. Zach LaVine is another one of those guys that kind of just, oh my God, so talented, but he was basically dying out there in Chicago that kept young guys. So he finally got out of there. Good for him. He's out there in Sacramento, but the Kings got off of De'Aaron Fox. Now that's going to be interesting because the Kings losing Fox is
big.
San Antonio Spurs game. Because they're trying to set up for a future. That's a nice pickup for them because, De'Aaron's very young. He entered the league very young. He's getting some seasoning from, Chris Paul. And I already mentioned Stephon Castle. And, De'Aaron Fox, he's like 6'3", 6'4". He's not a small guy. Really reminds me of our teammate, Andy Jones. He's a lefty. He's kind of awkward like that. But good God, he can get buckets. He's really, really good. So I like their backcourt. So I think Zach LaVine and kind of being involved with all of that movement is one. And then I'm going to end on two areas that I thought are interesting. Number one, we saw it last night. Cavaliers against the Celtics. Now, the Celtics didn't have a couple of guys, including Porzingis, and that does impact them. But what DeAndre Hunter, Philadelphia area DeAndre Hunter, who was kind of stuck in no man's land in Atlanta, what he brings to Cleveland, that extra layer of depth at 6'8.5", who's a swing guy who can guard smart and he can rebound. Reminds me of Joe Smith. Remember Joe Smith? I worked with Joe Smith when I was in Cleveland. For 7 years, and he was a player for the Cavaliers. People don't realize Joe Smith was that 18-point-a-game guy. He was #1 draft pick, Maryland player, just a hell of a pro. A little before his time, DeAndre Hunter reminds me of Joe Smith. He can make big shots and he's tough, but what he does is, you got the big guys, all the big, heavy guys crashing the board. In Cleveland, they got, I mentioned Mobley. They got the big, tall guy with the Brooklyn Nets. Now he's with them with the Afro. I forget his name. Allen. Shot blocker, long, reminds you of like the back in the day 70s guys. So them guys are all battling. Yeah. But who's your third guy to sweep it up? And DeAndre's coming in there as their third guy, and he is snatching up rebounds and getting those 12 to 14 to 15 to 16 points, which is what you need consistently out of your third option. See, he's different than Tobias Harris, who played in Philly, who's an excellent player, but he was mostly offensive. He wasn't helping you defensively, and he wasn't really a good rebounder offensively and defensively. DeAndre is his equal as an offensive player, but he's tougher and he has a presence. So Cleveland, as we saw last night, could be a player in the Eastern Conference as real competition. I thought the Knicks, with their depth, were going to do that, but we'll see now that Robinson's back because Josh Hart, you're not going to be able to beat teams with him being your third rebounder when the other guy's throwing in a 6'9" guy, 6'8" guy. So that's going to be interesting. And then the last piece, Tony, on the trades, Luka and AD, that's going to be interesting for all the reasons that we know. Number one, when you go to play with LeBron, who is the most difficult player to play with in the league, even though he is the most unselfish player, but he does so many things that for those of us that are limited in what we do, like I'm a 5'10" point guard, big mouth, run the floor, run the show, coach on the floor. That's what I do. If now you run in the point and you go tell me to go sit in the corner, that's kind of like not really what I do. But with LeBron, because he's so talented in running the point, he'll run the point one time, next time he's playing the 2 guard, the next time he's playing the 3 guard. So trying to find that mix is difficult. So Luka struggling early on, it's not surprising for them to find their mix. But LeBron inspires guys to play better and harder. The question is can a great player still be great? That was Magic's and Russell's greatest asset. Unlike Wilt was an eclipse. Everybody, even Jerry Wells, Elgin Baylor, you know what I mean? Everybody had to kneel to Wilt. He commanded everything. He was the eclipse of the sun. And that's why he only won 2. Where when Russell could win them all, because Russell didn't have to be the leading everything to be the dominant player. You know what I'm saying? And so can Luka still be? Remember, we're talking about a 29-point-a-game scorer in Dallas. He was an MVP candidate. Can his playing with LeBron still be a 29-point-a-game scorer or whatever? Or is he going to dip to 22, 23, 24? We're going to see. And then AD. On paper, AD always looks great. He dresses great. He keeps his beard well-groomed, everything. But other than Joel Embiid, I've never seen a guy more Teflon than AD. Talent-wise, on a piece of paper, of course, he's a talent. But you never know when the guy's going to go down. It's like Mr. Glass. I think Samuel Jackson played him in a movie, one time where he was a guy that he had the bad luck of breaking. And it doesn't matter what it was. Some guys could get into car accidents. Some people could play football, never get injured. But Mr. Glass didn't matter. He was just going to walk down the steps and boom, break something. And that's what it seems like with Anthony Davis. It just seems like he can't get healthy. But if he does, along with the other guys, Dallas is going to be an interesting team. The only problem for Dallas in closing, Tony, was Kyrie is not really a point guard. He's got point guard skills, but he doesn't really think, and he definitely doesn't play the game like a point guard. He's a shoot first, and he's one of the best I've ever seen at it. So when you get in the playoffs, as you know, and I go back to those last 3 or 4 minutes where decision making is who do I call the play for? Who needs to touch the ball to get the cobwebs off? Because I'm going to need them down the stretch. You know, those kind of things. I know what LeBron's going to do. 9 times out of 10, LeBron's going to make the right decision. He's going to make the right call. I'm not sure if Kyrie's going to do that. So those are my thoughts on those recent trades since the deadline. And it should be interesting to see, especially how the Dallas trade emerges. I expect AD sometime in mid-March to come back, see if he can fit in, because everybody's going to be talking about, yeah, he's back from injury, but they haven't played together. Yes, Lively's back from injury, and the big fella's back from injury, but they haven't played together. And you know, team chemistry and cohesion is important because AD now is playing a different position than what they're used to. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works in the next couple of weeks.
All right, folks. There you have it. Straight from pro sports community consultant, brother Julani Gao, a.k.a. Little Anthony. Gave it to you, brought it to you raw on Saturday morning. So, in conclusion, I just want to, once again, thank my brother for coming on and spending some time, on TGBA platform and, sharing his perspective and his experiences and wisdom, as it relates to the game of basketball, the industry, and, business as a whole. We're going to follow up on this, and we're going to get into some other things. We're going to talk about branding and NILs, and we're going to talk about, career after sports and, how do I put myself in position, families of student athletes, on how to be recruited successfully, become a real valuable prospect that will raise the eyebrows of colleges and universities around the country. So stay tuned. We're building some blocks here, and we're going to give some really good information that's going to help so many of you student athletes, so many of you families, and also you guys and gals who are in the professional ranks. So with that being said, here is Tony J clocking out.
Peace.
All right, for tuning in to today's podcast. If you know anyone that will benefit from what we share, have them subscribe to our YouTube channel at Tony Coleman TGBA. Remember, on the Total Game Basketball Academy with Tony J. Coleman,
all I do is win, no matter what. Focused on my grind and I'm never giving up. And every time I step up in the building, everybody hands go up. And they stay there.
All right.
Good stuff. Good stuff.